Hi, welcome to video 2. As promised, in this video, we're going to look at some specific treatises and practice guides. We're also going to talk about some of those other types of secondary sources that were on that very long list in video 1. So if we go back to our hypothetical, another really good place to start for any issue that you have in California are the Witkin treatises. They're one of these sources that courts do actually cite to. So they're a great way to not just understand something, but to have something that you might be able to cite later. They are available in print, of course. They're also online on both West and Lexis. I'm going to show them to you on West simply because there are some searching features that are available on West. For one thing, you can search across all 4 at once. In West, you have this Witkin Finding Aids resource. If you open that up, you'll notice that there's an index that searches across all 4 Witkins. So I know from the first video that depicting a living person as a fictional character is a special issue in defamation. If I look in the index for both variations on defamation and variations on fiction, right there in the index, there is a Witkin entry that is exactly on point. We would definitely want to look at that. It's often a very good idea to browse the table of contents to look for sections that are related to, just this one section that you might pick up in the index that looks really useful. You're also going to want to read maybe some general sections, and there might be some sections related to that one section that you pulled up in the index. So either way is a perfectly fine way to look through. You can also always keyword search. To show you what one of these sections looks like, this is a pretty short one. You can see even this really short background on this intro to defamation is really useful, chock full of links, chock full of information and links. Secondary sources you might want to take a look at. Primary sources you would definitely want to take a look at as starting places. And here we've spotted another issue. We might well have a public official or a public figure, and that's going to have some special relevance when you're looking at a defamation case. As I promised, I would show you a couple of slides on Cheetah, just to remind you that not everything is going to be in Lexis and West. This happens to be one of the leading copyright treatises. The other one is Nimmer on copyright, and Nimmer actually teaches here at UCLA. So for those of you that are interested in IP, this shows you the subject areas, the practice areas that Cheetah has materials in. I actually use this database more than I use anything else because it is flat rate. So once your firm has paid for a subscription, you're not going to get charged something that you would have to pass through to a client every time you search it. There were also materials in here that don't exist anywhere else. Practice guides, I want to highlight 2 sets of practice guides that are really important to California attorneys, Rudder and CEB. Rudder is really important, especially to litigators. When I went to a friend's her mixer at some point, when I said that I am a librarian working at a law school, one of the people that she works with didn't actually grab me by the shoulders and shake me when he asked, "Do you tell them about Rudder?" But I think he really wanted to. That is how important it is to California litigators. Those are definitely the guides that we get asked for most often by practicing attorneys when they come into the library here at UCLA. CEB is also another really great platform that you should know about if you're going to practice in California. So the Rudder guides, they are published by West. So at this point, they're only available in Westlaw or in print. Like Witkin, you can search all of them at once or individual guides in Westlaw. I particularly want to highlight these civil procedure before trial guides. Those are the ones that we get asked for absolutely the most often. They are really heavily, heavily, heavily used by litigators. If we look in one of these, I think we can see why they are so heavily used. You can see kind of like all these other sources that we've been looking at, lots of primary and secondary sources to help you with your research, this sort of plain language explanation of what's going on. But then also, as you get further down one of these sections, you'll see just laid out for you, what are the elements of a claim? what are the defenses to the claim, with cross-references to sections within the guide where you would find out more if you needed to get more in depth into issues about the claim elements or defenses. Right there is the statute of limitations. Within the California Code of Civil Procedure, you would go to take a look. I keep pointing this out. This is also a way to continue to spot issues, continue to find terms of art. And the thing about practice guides is you will find not just these explanations of things, but also practice tips. So in this case, point that you might negotiate on when you're going through interrogatories, you may not win on this objection, but it is usually still something that you want to bring up. CEB is its own platform that has a ton of practice guides in it. You should definitely know about it while you're a student. Obviously, you have access to it, but you also will continue to have access to it after you graduate. This is the platform to log in on. You have to sign up for it separately, and there's information on how to do that at that link. Even after you no longer have free access, for those of you that are considering being solos or practicing in a small firm, this is a relatively affordable source of practice guides and primary materials and practice materials. There are definitely solos and small firms that rely primarily on CEB for their research, and then just use Lexis and West in more limited circumstances. So let's actually take a look at one of these practice guides. Another thing to know, CEB also has continuing legal education in it. So once you're a practicing attorney, to keep an active bar number, you'll have to do a certain amount of that every so many years. So let's take a look at their litigation guide, just to see by way of comparison with the Rudder guide that we just looked at. Also has really useful stuff in it. Super convenient checklist of objections you might raise, with citations to either the case or a part of the evidence code. And then you'll notice, much like the Rudder guide, there are practice tips. CEB also has this judge's perspective, because judges are pretty heavily involved in helping to write the CEB practice guides. And CEB also has a practitioner feature that is a lot like the kind of practical guidance that you would get on Lexis or West, kind of how-to guides and checklists and sample documents that you might get on Lexis or West. You could also get this way. And you can filter by practice area or resource type over here. So I want to move on to talking about jury instructions. So CEB is great if you're looking for something that's kind of low cost, but if you are really, really budget conscious and want something that's free, California jury instructions are actually this like really underappreciated free resource. Not every state makes this kind of annotated jury instruction that California makes available free. There's a link there to the free version that we're going to take a look at. There's also a paid unofficial version on West, but it's actually not as useful as the free version from the courts. The free version from the court is published by Lexis. So you'll see, just like the paid sources we looked at, it will give you secondary sources as starting places because it is published by Lexis. It's going to lean toward what's available on Lexis. We're going to take a look at forms of pleading and practice in a minute, but it does have cross-references as well to the Rudder guide. So again, for something that's free, this is an unbelievably useful way to start looking for other sources. So let's take a look at the California forms of pleading and practice in a minute. Some of the other ways that you might find forms, if you work at a firm that is large enough to have a knowledge management system, which are these searchable databases of work products that other people have produced in the past. The California Judicial Council does have standardized fill-in-the-box forms. Unlike the jury instructions, which are really helpful, these are just the blank forms. So you probably will want to use a commercial form book, or you'll also find sample forms sometimes in treatises, practice guides. We're already kind of seeing that as we've gone through. So form books don't just provide blank forms, they provide detailed examples and often explanations of all kinds of documents, both litigation and transactional documents. So form books are sometimes jurisdictional. We're going to look at California forms of pleading and practice, or they may be focused on an area of law. So for example, just specifically drafting entertainment industry contracts. Let's take a break from our defamation hypothetical because your cousin called you up and has been kicked out of her rent-controlled apartment because the landlord said she was going to move in, but according to one of her former neighbors, she didn't, and there's actually a new tenant renting the place. Is there anything she can do? We're going to look at forms of pleading and practice to see if there's anything on point. This is one that is a Lexis-only source. It is also available in print. You can see it is not a cheap item in print, but I think you'll probably see why this is actually so valuable when we look at it. This is another one we get asked for a lot by practicing attorneys. We're going to look specifically at this version, the one that does not say forms from in front of it. What you want is the California Forms of Pleading and Practice annotated. If you look at the forms from version, you're going to only get the forms. It's not going to have all this wonderful annotated material that we're going to take a look at. The Forms of Pleading and Practice does have an index, but the table of contents is alphabetical, so it's not really a huge difference between searching the index and searching the table of contents. In this case, if we keep scrolling down, landlord and tenant is here. And you'll note when I open one of these up that there's a lot more than forms in here. Essentially, it's also a practice guide. There's a cross-references section, way to spot new issues. We're going to take a look. There is also a section that you might want to take a look at on just wrongful eviction. So this cross-references section, right, like I say, spot new issues. It'll tell you where else in the forms of pleading and practice you might want to take a look. None of these are probably really at issue in your cousin's case, but you could definitely imagine landlord-tenant issues where any of these could come up. When we take a look at wrongful eviction, you'll see this practice tip that your cousin's issue, where a landlord says they're going to move into the unit and doesn't, is actually the most common type of wrongful eviction in rent control jurisdictions. So there is probably a form just for our situation. Pull back out and take a look at the table of contents. Oh, look right there. There is a form for damages just for this specific situation. Once you click into one of these, this enhanced version is going to be the form only, which is generally speaking not what you're going to want. What you're generally going to want is this fully annotated form, because these annotations explain to you why you would use this particular form as opposed to other forms, other issues that might come up, all kinds of practice tips, right? So these annotations are incredibly useful. There are other ways to get forms in Lexis. So you could either filter this way. Instead of searching all content, just search sample forms here. And you can always narrow by jurisdiction here too. And then there's a sample forms link. So if I search this way, you'll usually just get that forms from version. The table of contents, as I've probably beaten to death, these are a really great way to look around, see what is near your form that might also be useful, right? So rent control near your wrongful eviction form, near this one wrongful eviction form that popped up in your search. Also, when you're searching, these filters on the side can be really helpful. So you could just narrow to litigation or transaction. If you do pull up one of these forms from where it's only the form, to get the full version with annotations, you would click this original source link over here. On West, there's a forms link on the homepage, and then you drill in by jurisdiction or topic. In this case, I went in California, and then I looked at real property as a topic. So you can see this is, rather than calling it fraudulent, they're calling it pretense of owner. This is in real property practice guide. So that, as I mentioned, is another way to find forms. And if we go into West, right, table of contents on the side. One thing that is nice in West is they do have, they make their forms downloadable in a pretty easy to edit, close to plain text document. The last thing I want to talk about in these slides is our briefs databases. So I recommend, if you're going to look for a brief to use as a model brief, again, if you work at a firm that has a knowledge management system, that's usually a really good way to find briefs. And if you don't, you also just talk to colleagues. The reason why I would recommend using using a firm or colleagues brief as a model is that you have some sense of the quality of the brief that you're looking at when you do that. There are briefs databases in both West and Lexis, and I cannot stop you from using them. But before you do, I highly recommend following the link that is at the bottom of this slide when you get the slides. I'm not going to read all of these quotes from judges dunking on people's brief writing ability. But when you are looking at a briefs database in Lexis or West, there is no quality control over them. Although once you know who opposing counsel is in your case, briefs databases could be really useful to find samples of their writing and kind of know what you're dealing with. Other than that, though, really be extremely cautious when you're using briefs databases. In the next set of slides, we're going to look through even more kinds of secondary sources, and I will see you soon.